Here are the supplies that will come in your kit. Paper for the pages of your journal, a glue brush for applying glue, PVA glue, 2 book boards for your covers, an awl for punching holes into your covers, a bone folder, a needle, and waxed linen thread. This is perfect for binding as it's much stronger than a regular thread. In addition, you'll have a few fine papers to choose from to cover your boards with. Additionally, you'll need a ruler, scissors, pencil, and then something to protect your surface when you punch holes and glue. So before we start, it's helpful to learn the anatomy of a book. So you have the open edge, which is the foredge, and the opposite side, which is your spine. And then you have your head and your tail. Then, of course, you have your 2 covers, the front and the back. And then you have all the pages, which are sectioned off into what are called signatures, which we'll learn more about creating those. So signatures are made up of folded sheets of paper that are nested together. So I have one folded sheet here, and I go ahead and close it and put it inside another folded sheet, and then put those 2 inside another folded sheet. So this is a 3-page signature. You can add more pages to your signatures if you choose. This one has 5 sheets in it. I don't recommend going over 5 sheets because then they'll start to kind of stick out over the edge of your board as you nest more and more sheets in there. So I would recommend between 3 and 5 sheets. So to start with, you want to determine the size of your sheets. One edge should be the height of your book, in this case 7 inches, and the other edge should be as long as a double page spread, which in this case is 9 3/4 inches. So I have 8.5 by 11 sheets here, but I've already cut some down to the dimensions we just mentioned. So it's 7 inches by 9 3/4 inches, and now they're ready to fold and to nest into signatures. You can do as many signatures as you want. In this case, I did 7 signatures, and you can do more or less than that. If you really want to see the stitching pattern, I recommend at least 5. Once you've cut all your pages, it's time to start folding your signatures. You can just simply fold them in half, and you can use your bone folder to help make the crease really crisp. I start by just folding everything, and then I start nesting them together into signatures. Okay, so now I have all of my pages folded and my signatures nested together, and I'm ready to take the next step. Next, we're going to cover our boards with decorative paper. So you can choose which one of the papers you want to use and then cut it down to the right size. So each board will need 2 pieces of paper, one larger sheet that will be roughly 7 inches by 9 inches, and then one smaller sheet that will be roughly 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. The larger sheet will be used to wrap around the outside. So just to show you how that will fit, we'll take that extra paper around the border to wrap around the edges. And then after doing that, we'll use the smaller panel of paper to cover the raw board that's left. Before we start gluing, we just need to trim the corners off of the larger sheet of paper. That way we won't have too much excess when we wrap everything around. So simply center one of the boards on one of the larger sheets of paper, and then you're going to use some scissors to trim off the corners. And you don't want to go all the way to the edge of the corner. You want to leave maybe 1/8 of an inch so that none of the exposed board kind of pokes out of the corner. And just cut it on an angle like so. And you're going to do that for all the corners. And this will allow us to make really neat folds without any paper bulking up underneath. Okay, now it's time to start gluing. You'll notice I put some scrap paper underneath my decorative paper because we don't want to get glue on the table. And I'm going to start in the center of the sheet and start gluing out past the edges. So it's really important that the entire surface gets covered. So that's one reason to just start center and push all the way out past the edge so that entire surface gets covered. I find that kind of working from the center to the edges also helps me have a little bit more control over the paper. And we're just going to coat the entire thing. So you want a nice even coat, but you don't want it to be super thick and heavy or puddling, because that will just make the glue kind of ooze out the sides when you're assembling things, and it's not necessary to have that much glue. Different papers react differently to glue. So sometimes some papers at this stage start curling up while you're gluing. So don't be alarmed if that happens. One tip is just to kind of keep pushing the glue into the fibers of the paper with the brush, and that'll eventually start to absorb into the fibers of the paper and the paper will relax. So if ever I have a paper that's curling up on me, I just kind of keep brushing until everything kind of relaxes and smooths down. So I've almost covered the entire surface of the paper. One thing I do after I've covered the bottom with glue is I might just kind of go back up to the top and just add in or retouch the glue in case any of it's dried up a little bit while I'm gluing. But that pretty much does it. So now I'm going to take the board and go ahead and center it onto that one piece of paper. Just kind of drop it in, push it down slightly, and then making sure your fingers are clean and not too gluey, you can go ahead and pick it up and start to smooth down the decorative side and getting out any bubbles that might be in there and making sure it's really grabbing onto the board. I like to start by using my hands to do this. You can also use the bone folder to help smooth things down as well. So I've got my bone folder here and I'm just now going back over and smoothing things down. So next we're going to fold up the head and the tail. I'm actually starting with the tail and just curling it around the board and making sure it's really sticking to that edge of the board as well as the back side of the board. So really reinforcing that and then going to the opposite side and doing the same thing. Really pulling it tight. You don't want any wrinkles or bubbles or gaps. So for doing the other longer edges, one thing you'll need to do is kind of tuck in the corners. I think of hospital corners when I'm making my bed. So I like to use the bone folder to kind of press that little extra bit against the side of the board. You can see there, just tucking those in, and that will make it easier to fold in the rest of it. Sometimes I'll just dab a little glue on the tip of my bone folder and dab those spots that I folded over that don't have glue on them, just to help the whole thing stick. And then it's ready to wrap around. So once you've got that edge done, you can go ahead and move on to the last edge. Again, tucking in the sides before you wrap it all around. I like this little tip with the bone folder for gluing, but I also just, word of caution, make sure you clean off any glue before you use the bone folder again to smooth things down, or that at least you're using a different edge of the bone folder. One thing that happens at this point is some of the glue may have started drying, so I think I might have to just reapply a little bit here, so that's no big deal. But if you notice like this part here is pulling up, you can just grab your brush again and add a little bit more glue on there. I'm just careful to get the underside only instead of getting glue other places. All right, so that should do it, and I'll go ahead and smooth that down. So now that we've got this bigger piece wrapped around the board, we can go ahead and add the smaller panel to the inside. Okay, so I've got my smaller piece of paper here. I'm going to take the same approach to gluing as I did with the bigger piece, starting in the center and pushing out past the edges. Okay, same as before, I make sure my fingers are clean. Go ahead and pick up that panel, and now we are going to go ahead and center it on the inside of this board. It helps to grab opposite corners to give you a little bit more control, and I kind of hover before placing it down to make sure it's pretty centered, and then go ahead and smooth it down. Keep your eye out for any glue that might kind of come out the sides. Hopefully, if you did a good amount, you won't have any coming out, but just check for that. And then I go ahead and smooth the rest of it out with the bone folder. And then go ahead and repeat the same steps on your second cover board. Next, it's time to mark where we're going to put the holes in our signatures. So I've stacked everything flush here and lined up my ruler, and I'm going to measure out the holes and mark them. So the first one's going to be a 1/2 inch from the end. The next will be 1 inch. Then we'll jump to 2.5. And then to 3.5. Four and a half. Then to 6. And 6.5. So next I'm going to use one of the signatures as a guide to mark where the holes should go in the cover. So you're going to line up the spine edge, the folded edge, with one edge of the board, and just pull it maybe 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch in, probably more like 3/8, and make it parallel to the edge. And then wherever there's a marking along the edge of your signature, go ahead and make that marking on the book too. Just want to note that I'm on the inside, I'm making the marks on the inside. You can make them on the outside too if you want to, because you're going to go ahead and punch through these so you won't see the pencil. Sometimes the patterns of the paper make it difficult to see the pencil, so I just make sure to really make a good little mark there. Of course, you can always go back and darken it if you need to. All right, now we're ready to punch. So next we're going to use an awl to go ahead and punch holes in the cover where we made all of the markings. And make sure you have something to protect your table, like a thick piece of cardboard or a cutting mat, so you don't destroy it. And then you're just going to find the holes, or find the markings you made, and go ahead and punch through with the awl. And I like to push down and then twist. Sometimes I don't go all the way through. I'll just get a good hole in there, and then when I'm done going through all of them, I'll pick it up and then kind of look at how far it went through and go back in from the other side, which can also help the edges look clean. Okay, now I'm done punching all the holes in the first board. I'm going to use it as a template to punch holes in the second board. Make sure when you stack your two boards together that the patterns are right side up so that you don't have one cover that's upside down once you start stitching them together. So you can just stack them together with the one that has the holes in it already on top, and then go ahead and push her all through the holes down to the board below to create holes in that one as well. I continue to kind of check to make sure everything's aligned in between each hole, because sometimes with the pressure the boards can slip around. So just make sure to check yourself as you go, so that it doesn't get skewed. Okay, now both covers are done, and next we can go ahead and punch holes in our signatures. Next, to punch the holes in each of the signatures. So simply take each signature, open them up to the center page, and then go ahead and lay it down with the marks facing up. Just make sure everything stays lined up, and then you can go ahead and punch through all the holes. And you'll do this on all the signatures. Okay, so now all of my holes are punched in all my signatures, and it's time to start binding. So go ahead and stack all of your signatures and covers together and do a quick check to make sure all the holes are lined up before you start stitching. Now we can go ahead and measure out our thread. I like to do as many spine lengths worth of thread as there are layers for my book. So I have 7 signatures, 2 covers, that's 9 layers. And when I measure out the spine length, I'm actually really generous. So there's typically an extra inch on each end. And that's usually enough for me to stitch my way through the whole book. If you find that length to be unruly to deal with, you can do shorter length. You'll just have to tie on a little extra thread potentially midway through your stitching, which is no big deal. I just happen to like to do it all in one piece. Go ahead and thread your needle. A single strand is fine, you don't have to double it, and then knot the end. I usually do a double or triple knot. And now you're going to go ahead and start by taking the back cover and the last signature, and I'm keeping the rest of the stack in order. Go ahead and open up the signature, and you're going to put your needle in the bottom hole and feed it through. Pull that all the way through. The knot will stop it from pulling through the hole. And then next I'm going to wrap the thread around the outside of the spine of the cover and feed it in through the bottom. So I went from what will be the outside of the book to the inside, and I'm pulling the thread through, but I'm still below that signature. My thread's coming out the left side here of my stitch. Next I'm going to wrap it around. So I'm going to go back in under the right side and pull it out the left side. So I'm just going under that stitch that I created that attached the signature to the spine. So I'm basically creating a loop around that stitch. Just checking to make sure everything's taut before I tighten my stitch. So next I'm going to go ahead and put my needle back in the hole in the signature. So this is the same hole we came out of when we first stitched through, except now we're going from the outside to the inside and pulling that back through. So one habit I get into is just checking all my stitches along the way. Sometimes the book and the pages, they move around as you're working, so I just make sure there's no gaps and then I'm pulling the thread taut as I go. So once you've checked that, you can go ahead to the next hole, go from the inside to the outside. So we're basically repeating what we just did on the first hole. So go ahead and pull that thread through from the inside of the signature to the outside. As you can see, it is a lot of thread to work with, so if you prefer shorter thread, you can totally do that. You'll just have to tie on extra thread partway through your book. So going from the inside of the signature to the outside, and now I'm going to go ahead and wrap the thread around the spine edge of the cover board and poke my needle through from the bottom or the outside through to the top or the inside. And I'm pulling my thread out on the left side of that first stitch that I made from the signature to the board, just like we did last time. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and tuck my needle under that stitch from the right to the left. So I'm essentially just kind of wrapping around that stitch and pull that through. And then just like we did before, once I tighten that up, I'm going to go ahead and go back into the hole in the signature that we came out of in the first place. Sometimes you have to check to make sure you're going through the center of the signature before you pull through. So then go ahead and tighten that up. And you're just going to make your way up the spine, repeating that same stitch over and over again until we get to that last hole and need to add another signature. Okay, so now we're approaching the last hole in this first signature. And we're going to start out doing the same steps that we've done on all the other holes so far. So go ahead and stitch through from the inside of the signature to the outside. Sometimes it's easy to get knots in your thread, so you just have to untangle them every once in a while. Okay, quick fast forward so you don't have to watch that. All right, so pulling this all the way through. Going around the edge and coming back up from the bottom and out to the left. Now tucking under that stitch from right to left. So where we usually went back in the same hole we came out of in the signature we've been attaching, now we're going to go ahead and stack the next signature on top. And we'll go into the hole on that signature instead. So you make sure everything's lined up and then stitch from the outside to the inside of the next signature. So what we're going to be doing as we add more signatures is essentially a very similar stitch to what we did to attach the covers, except instead of kind of looping around the cover board, we're going to be looping around the previous stitch. So I'm pulling that through from the inside to the outside. And then going from right to left, I'm going to stitch under that previous stitch that connects this first signature to the cover board. What we're doing here is known as a chain stitch, and as you add more and more signatures, you'll see that this little stitch we're doing now looks like a chain link. So once you've gone through or under that stitch, you're going to go back into the hole that you came out of in this second signature here. So go ahead and pull that tight, go down to the next hole, stitch from the inside to the outside. And then we're going to repeat what we just did. So going from right to left, we're going to stitch underneath the stitch that connects the first signature to the cover board. So you're just always going down to the previous stitch and stitching under it, and then going back up into the hole you came out of. So you're going to continue doing this same exact stitch all the way till you get to that last hole. You're going to add the next signature just the way we added this one, and just keep going on with the same stitch. So this is what you'll be doing for most of the book. It's going to change up again when we get to the very last signature. And what we'll do is attach the last signature and the front cover together at the same time. And until then, you can just repeat these steps. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my final signature to my book. So I'm going to go ahead and add the final signature and the front cover at the same time. So stacking those both on top, as usual, making sure the holes are aligned. And I'm going to start by going inside the cover. So from the outside in, stitching through the cover with that last signature tucked in there still. And pulling it snug, I'm going to go ahead and stitch under the previous stitch from right to left, and then pulling through. Got to work a little to keep my thread from getting tangled here. Okay, so pulling that tight, I still haven't gone into that last signature yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Going into the bottom hole here of the signature. It can be kind of tricky to feed the needle through this first time around. Again, I always check. Okay, so that didn't go through. I might do a little cheat on this one and just slide it out to help me get into that first hole. And that'll help hold things in place as I work my way up the spine. Just make sure to keep things from getting tangled as you pull it tight. Thread might be getting a little tired at this point from all the stitching, but it's still really strong because it's got the beeswax coating. So once I've got that tight, and it's going to move around a little bit until I get more of the stitches in, but I still want to make sure it's as snug as possible. And then I'm going to go up to the next hole and repeat what I just did. So stitch from the inside of the signature out. And then once it's pulled tight, I'm going to go ahead and go through the cover from the outside to the inside. Once I pull that tight, I'm going to go ahead and go through the previous stitch, going from right to left. And then I'm going to go back up and in to the signature. It looks like I missed the center fold there, so just have to do that one more time. So you're going to continue to repeat this same stitch all the way up to the top. Okay, we've made it to the last hole. So congratulations for making it this far. We're going to do this final stitch the same way. So going from the inside of the signature to the outside, pulling that taut, and then going into the final hole in the cover. Pulling that taut, and then go ahead and stitch under that last stitch from right to left. And then we go back into the signature. So to finish off, you're simply going to stitch under that stitch inside the signature and tie a few knots, and then trim your thread. So I've got my scissors here, and just slide your needle under that previous stitch. And just do as many knots as are necessary to make sure it's not going to slip through that hole. I like to play it on the safe side and do maybe 2 or 3. And then once you've tied enough knots, you can go ahead and trim the end. I may need to just trim the first knot end a little shorter as well, so I'm going to go back and check on that. It's not too bad, but I'll cut that a little bit shorter. And that's it. You have bound your own handmade journal. Have fun filling the pages.